I never thought I would end up in a war with my homeowners association over something as absurd as the lack of frost on my windows. But here we are, sitting in a lawyer's office discussing criminal charges against the HOA president. It started on a bitter January morning in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I had just moved into Pine Ridge Estates 6 months earlier, a seemingly pleasant community with manicured lawns and strict rules about everything from mailbox colors to the height of your grass. I'm Gregory Harmon, a mechanical engineer who works from home most days, and I bought this house thinking it would be my peaceful sanctuary after years of apartment living. The neighborhood seemed nice enough during the summer move-in, but winter revealed something I hadn't anticipated. An HOA board with way too much time on their hands. That morning, I was making coffee when I heard aggressive knocking at my front door. The kind of knocking that makes you think someone is either being chased or really needs to use your bathroom. I opened the door to find Barbara Whitmore, the HOA president, standing there in a puffy pink jacket with a clipboard clutched to her chest like it was a shield. Her face was red from either the cold or anger, I couldn't tell which. "Mr. Harmon, we need to discuss a violation," she said, not even bothering with a greeting. I blinked at her, still holding my empty coffee mug. "Good morning to you too. What violation?" She gestured dramatically toward my front window. "Your windows are in clear violation of Community Standards Section 12.4. I looked at my windows. They looked perfectly normal to me, clean, intact, no cracks or broken glass. "I'm sorry, I don't understand what the problem is." Barbara's nostrils flared. "Mr. Harmon, it is currently 17 degrees outside. Every single home in this neighborhood has frost patterns on their windows. Every single one except yours. This creates an aesthetic inconsistency that disrupts the uniformity of our community." I actually laughed. I couldn't help it. "You're complaining because my windows don't have frost on them." "This is not a laughing matter," she snapped. "The HOA board has reviewed your property, and we're issuing a $200 fine for failure to maintain seasonal aesthetic consistency." "You can't be serious," I said, my smile fading. "You're fining me because my windows are too warm. The fine is legitimate and will be added to your HOA dues. You have 30 days to pay." She thrust a paper at me, which I took automatically. "Furthermore, if this violation continues, additional fines will be assessed weekly." She turned on her heel and marched down my driveway before I could even process what had just happened. I stood there in the freezing morning air, looking at the violation notice in my hand. Sure enough, it cited some obscure section about maintaining seasonal appearance standards and visual harmony with neighboring properties. I went back inside and actually read through my HOA covenant documents for the first time since signing them. Buried in the fine print was indeed a clause about maintaining seasonal aesthetic consistency, but it was so vague it could mean literally anything. I called my neighbor, Tom, a friendly guy in his 60s who had lived in Pine Ridge Estates for 15 years. "Tom, did the HOA just fine me for not having frost on my windows?" I asked. He laughed. "Welcome to Pine Ridge, kid. Barbara once fined someone for having icicles that were too long, said it looked aggressive. But frost patterns, that's a new one even for her. This can't be legal." "Probably not, but fighting it costs money. Most people just pay the fines and move on. It's easier than dealing with her." I wasn't most people. I had principles, and I wasn't about to pay $200 for having energy-efficient windows, because that's what it came down to, I realized. My windows didn't frost up because I had invested in high-quality, triple-pane windows with low emissivity coatings when I renovated the house after buying it. They were expensive as hell, but they kept my heating bills low and my house comfortable. Now, I was being penalized for making a smart investment. I decided to attend the next HOA board meeting, scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at the community center. The community center was a bland beige building that smelled like old carpet and disappointment. About 20 homeowners were scattered around the folding chairs, most looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Barbara sat at a table at the front with 4 other board members. I recognized 2 of them. Patricia, the secretary, a thin woman with severe glasses, and Donald, the treasurer, who always wore polo shirts tucked into khaki pants like he was perpetually ready for a golf game he'd never play. The meeting started with mundane discussions about landscaping contracts and pool maintenance for the upcoming summer. Then came the public comment period. I raised my hand. I'd like to discuss the fine I received for not having frost on my windows. The room went silent. Several people turned to look at me with expressions of pity, as if I had just volunteered to jump into shark-infested waters. Barbara's smile was tight. "Mr. Harmon, the violation was clearly documented and is in accordance with our community standards." "What community standard requires frost on windows?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I've read the entire covenant, and this interpretation is absurd. My windows don't frost because they're energy efficient. I'm being penalized for having better insulation." "The standard requires seasonal aesthetic consistency," Barbara replied, her voice taking on a condescending tone. "When every other home displays natural winter characteristics and yours does not, it creates visual discord." "Visual discord? They're windows. They're supposed to keep the cold out." Patricia leaned forward. "Mr. Harmon, the standards exist to maintain property values. When one home doesn't conform, it affects everyone. So you want me to intentionally make my windows less efficient so they'll frost up like everyone else's? We want you to be a team player," Barbara said. "This community thrives on uniformity and cooperation." I looked around the room. A few people were nodding along with Barbara, but several others looked uncomfortable. One woman near the back was actually rolling her eyes. "I'm not paying this fine," I said clearly. "It's unreasonable and likely unenforceable. If you want to pursue it, I'll see you in court." Barbara's face turned an impressive shade of purple. "Mr. Harmon, I strongly suggest you reconsider. The HOA has significant power to place liens on properties for unpaid fines." "Then I guess you'll be explaining to a judge why you think frost patterns are more important than energy efficiency." I left the meeting feeling both vindicated and anxious. I had drawn a line in the sand, but I knew Barbara wasn't the type to back down easily. The next morning, I found another violation notice on my door. This one cited me for having a trash can visible from the street for more than 2 hours after collection time. The garbage truck had come at 7 in the morning, and the notice was time-stamped at 9:15. I had been in a work meeting and hadn't brought the can in immediately. Another $100 fine. 2 days later, another notice. My lawn was allegedly a 1/4 inch too tall. $50. I started documenting everything. I took photos, kept records of every interaction, and made notes with timestamps. Barbara was clearly retaliating, trying to bury me in petty fines until I gave up and paid the frost pattern violation. The following week, something interesting happened. I was checking my mail when my neighbor across the street, a woman named Jennifer, approached me hesitantly. "Hey, Gregory, can I ask you something?" she said, glancing around as if Barbara might be hiding in the bushes. "How come your windows never frost up?" "Mine are covered every morning, and my heating bill is insane." I explained about my triple-pane windows and the low emissivity coating. Her eyes widened. "That's amazing. I've been trying to figure out how to lower my energy costs. We keep the thermostat at 72 and it still feels drafty." Better windows would definitely help, I said. The upfront cost is significant, but they pay for themselves over time. Could you send me information about the company you used? Over the next few days, 3 more neighbors approached me with the same question. Word was spreading about my magical frost-free windows, and people were interested. Very interested, especially when they heard how much I was saving on heating costs compared to what they were paying. Then came the next HOA board meeting. I attended again, ready for another round with Barbara. But this time, something was different. More people were there, including Jennifer and several other neighbors who had asked me about my windows. During the public comment period, Jennifer stood up. I'd like to discuss the fine issued to Mr. Harmon regarding his windows. I think it's ridiculous, and frankly, I'm considering upgrading my own windows to the same type he has. Are you going to fine me too? Barbara's smile was frozen. Mrs. Chen, the fine was issued because Mr. Harmon's property created an aesthetic inconsistency. But if other people upgrade their windows, there won't be an inconsistency, Jennifer pointed out. Unless you're saying we're required to have inefficient windows. Another neighbor, Marcus, stood up. This seems like the HOA is penalizing people for making environmentally responsible choices. That's not a good look. I watched as Barbara's carefully controlled meeting began to slip away from her. She tried to redirect the conversation, but more people were speaking up now, questioning the fine and the vague standards it was based on. Order. Barbara finally snapped, banging a gavel against the table. This discussion is tabled. Mr. Harmon's fine stands as issued. Next item on the agenda. But the seed of rebellion had been planted. After the meeting, several people exchanged contact information with me, asking for details about my window installer. Barbara watched from across the room, her expression murderous. 3 days later, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. They were officially pursuing collection of all my fines, which now totaled over $500 with late fees added. Furthermore, if I didn't pay within 15 days, they would begin the process of placing a lien on my property. That was when I decided to hire my own lawyer. I found Sarah Martinez, an attorney in Colorado Springs who specialized in HOA disputes. She was in her 40s, sharp-eyed, and had a reputation for not taking any nonsense. This is one of the more creative HOA overreaches I've seen, she said after reviewing my documentation. Frost patterns. That's actually impressive in its absurdity. Can they really put a lien on my house over this? They can try, but we won't let it get that far. I'm going to send them a letter explaining that their fine is based on an overly broad and vague standard that likely violates Colorado HOA law. We'll also point out that they're engaging in selective enforcement and retaliation. Retaliation. All those other fines they've been hitting you with after you challenged the first one. Classic retaliation. It's going to work in our favor. Sarah sent her letter, and for a brief moment, I thought things might calm down. I was wrong. Instead of backing down, Barbara doubled down. She called an emergency HOA board meeting to discuss the growing problem of homeowner noncompliance. I found out about it from Tom, who texted me with a warning. At the emergency meeting, which I attended with Sarah beside me, Barbara presented what she called a comprehensive review of Mr. Harmon's violations. She had compiled a list of alleged infractions going back to the day I moved in. Most of them were completely fabricated or so minor they were laughable. My welcome mat was allegedly the wrong shade of brown. I had once parked my car in my driveway at an angle slightly off from perpendicular. The bird feeder in my backyard was visible from the street through a gap in the fence. "This is harassment," Sarah said calmly but firmly. You've created a fictional narrative of violations to justify your inappropriate fine. None of these alleged infractions were documented or issued at the time they supposedly occurred. This is textbook retaliation, and it stops now." Barbara's face went red. "How dare you accuse this board of harassment? We are simply enforcing the standards that every homeowner agreed to when they purchased property in Pine Ridge Estates." "Standards that you're applying selectively and punitively," Sarah replied. "We'll be filing a complaint with the Colorado Division of Real Estate, and if this continues, we'll pursue a lawsuit for harassment and abuse of authority." The meeting descended into chaos after that. Several homeowners started arguing with the board, while others defended Barbara. I sat there watching the community fracture over the principle of whether windows should have frost on them. 2 weeks later, something unexpected happened. The weather warmed up briefly, bringing temperatures into the 40s. The frost patterns that had been the source of all this trouble disappeared from everyone's windows. I thought maybe this would end the conflict, but I should have known better. Barbara sent out a community-wide email announcing that she wanted to conduct voluntary home inspections to help homeowners identify potential violations before they were formally cited. The email specifically mentioned that she was concerned about various winter preparations that might not be up to standard. No one was buying it. Several homeowners replied, all to express their concerns about the inspections, and someone leaked the email thread to a local news station. That's when things got really interesting. A reporter named Michael Chen from a Colorado Springs station reached out to me for an interview. I discussed it with Sarah, who thought it might actually help our case by putting public pressure on the HOA. The segment aired on a slow news day, which meant it got more attention than it might have otherwise. The reporter presented it with the perfect mix of humor and legitimate concern. They showed B-roll of my perfectly normal frost-free windows, interviewed me about the fines, and got reactions from other homeowners. Barbara declined to be interviewed, which made the HOA look even worse. The story went viral locally, then got picked up by a few national outlets as a quirky human interest piece. Suddenly, I was getting emails from people across the country sharing their own HOA horror stories. News trucks showed up in our neighborhood. Barbara's house was clearly visible in some of the shots, and I later heard she was furious about it. The negative publicity seemed to have an effect. The HOA board called another meeting, this time announcing they would be reviewing their enforcement policies. I attended with Sarah and about 50 other homeowners, way more than usually showed up. Barbara looked exhausted. The other board members looked uncomfortable. Before Barbara could even start her prepared remarks, Donald, the treasurer, cleared his throat. "I move that we rescind the fine issued to Mr. Harmon regarding his windows," he said. "I've reviewed the matter, and I don't believe the fine was appropriately issued under our current standards." Barbara's head snapped toward him. "Donald, we discussed this." "I know what we discussed, Barbara, but this has gotten out of hand. We're on the news. People are talking about our community like we're some kind of joke. It needs to end." Patricia, the secretary, nodded slowly. "I agree. I think we should rescind the fine and revise our standards to be more specific and reasonable." I watched Barbara's carefully constructed authority crumble. The vote was called and the motion passed 3-2, with Barbara and one other board member voting against it. I should have felt relieved. The fine was rescinded and I wouldn't have to pay anything. But Sarah leaned over and whispered, "This isn't over. She's going to retaliate somehow." Sarah was right. 3 days after the meeting, I found a notice on my door stating that the HOA was implementing new energy efficiency standards that would require all homes to undergo mandatory inspections to ensure they met minimum insulation requirements. The inspections would cost each homeowner $250. It was vindictive and transparent. Barbara was trying to recoup her loss and punish me at the same time by forcing me to pay for an inspection of the very windows that had started this whole mess. Sarah immediately sent another letter threatening legal action. "This is getting ridiculous," she told me. "She's not going to stop until either she's removed from the board or we take serious legal action." Before we could file anything, however, something else happened that changed everything. Jennifer, my neighbor across the street, called me in the evening sounding distressed. "Gregory, I think you need to know something. I was at Barbara's house today dropping off some paperwork, and I overheard her on the phone. She was talking to someone about filing false police reports against you. Something about claiming you were harassing her." My blood ran cold. "Are you serious?" "I'm completely serious. I don't know if she actually did it, but she was definitely discussing it with someone. I thought you should know so you could protect yourself." I immediately called Sarah and relayed the information. She was quiet for a long moment. "That would be a crime," she said finally. "If she files a false police report, that's a serious offense, but we need proof." Jennifer overheard her. "That's hearsay. We need something more concrete. In the meantime, I want you to be very careful. Document everything. If the police do contact you, don't answer any questions without me present." I spent the next few days on edge, jumping every time I heard a car door close or saw someone walking past my house. But no police came. Maybe Jennifer had misunderstood, or maybe Barbara had thought better of it. Then, a week later, I got a call from Detective Lisa Morrison from the Colorado Springs Police Department. "Mr. Harmon, I need to speak with you about a harassment complaint that's been filed against you," she said. "Would you be willing to come down to the station for a voluntary interview?" My heart was pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "I'd be happy to cooperate, but I'll need my attorney present." "Of course. Can you come in tomorrow morning, say 10 o'clock? I called Sarah immediately and she cleared her schedule. That night I barely slept. I kept going over everything I'd done, every interaction I'd had with Barbara. I had never harassed her. I had challenged her at HOA meetings, but that was my right as a homeowner. I had never contacted her outside of official HOA business, never said anything threatening, never done anything that could remotely be construed as harassment. The next morning, Sarah and I sat in a small interview room at the police station. Detective Morrison was a woman in her 50s with gray streaked hair and a no-nonsense demeanor. She laid out the complaint. Barbara had filed a report claiming that I had been engaging in a pattern of harassment for months. She claimed I had been following her, taking photos of her house, making threatening phone calls, and even vandalizing her mailbox. She had submitted evidence, including photos of someone near her house at night and records of hang-up calls from blocked numbers. I was stunned. "Detective, none of that is true. I've never followed her, never called her except once to discuss HOA business months ago, and I certainly never vandalized anything." Sarah pulled out a thick folder. "Detective Morrison, my client, is the victim here, not the aggressor. Miss Whitmore has been engaged in systematic harassment of Mr. Harmon for months, all documented here. This false police report is simply the latest escalation in her retaliation against him for challenging an improper HOA fine." She walked the detective through everything: the original frost pattern fine, the subsequent petty violations, the escalating conflict, and Jennifer's warning about Barbara planning to file a false report. Detective Morrison listened carefully, taking notes. "These are serious allegations on both sides," she said. "Mr. Harmon, can you account for your whereabouts on the evenings Miss Whitmore claims you were near her property?" I work from home and I'm there most evenings. I can provide my work logs, video doorbell footage, anything you need. Over the next hour, we went through my documentation. I had time-stamped work logs, video footage from my smart doorbell showing me at home during the times Barbara claimed I was stalking her, and phone records showing I had never called her number except for that one documented call months ago. Detective Morrison's expression grew increasingly skeptical as she reviewed the evidence. "Wait here for a moment," she said, taking the folder with her. She was gone for 20 minutes. When she came back, she had another detective with her, a younger man who introduced himself as Detective Ryan Foster. "Mr. Harmon, we've reviewed your evidence and we have some additional information," Detective Morrison said. "We pulled traffic camera footage from near Miss Whitmore's residence. The person in her photos isn't you. Different build, different height. We also traced the hang-up calls. They came from a number registered to a telemarketing firm, not from you." Relief flooded through me, but Detective Foster wasn't smiling. "Miss Whitmore either filed this report knowing it was false, or she made extremely reckless accusations without verifying basic facts. Either way, we have a problem." "What happens now?" Sarah asked. "We need to speak with Miss Whitmore again," Detective Morrison said. "Given what we've found, there may be criminal charges for filing a false report. They asked me to remain available for follow-up questions, and Sarah and I left the station. In the parking lot, she turned to me. 'This is actually good for us,' she said. If they charge her with filing a false report, it completely undermines any authority she has left on the HOA board. It also gives us grounds for a civil suit if you want to pursue one." "I just want this to be over," I said honestly. "I just want to live in my house in peace." 2 days later, the neighborhood exploded with gossip. Barbara had been arrested. The details were scarce at first, but Tom filled me in on what he had heard. Apparently, when the detectives interviewed Barbara again, she had doubled down on her accusations, insisting I was guilty despite the evidence. She had become belligerent when confronted with the contradictions in her story, and eventually admitted she had suspected I was guilty of harassment even though she couldn't prove it. She claimed she had a right to file a police report based on her feelings of being threatened. That admission was apparently enough. She was charged with filing a false police report, a misdemeanor in Colorado. She was released on bond, but the damage was done. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. I attended, along with what seemed like every homeowner in Pine Ridge Estates. The mood was tense and electric. Donald, the treasurer, called the meeting to order. Barbara was notably absent. "As you all know by now, our president has been charged with a criminal offense related to false allegations against one of our homeowners," Donald said, his voice tight. "The board has voted in her absence to remove Barbara Whitmore from her position as president and from the board entirely, effective immediately. We are also conducting a full review of all enforcement actions taken in the past year to ensure they were appropriate." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Someone near the back started clapping, and it spread until most of the room was applauding. I sat there feeling surreal about the whole thing. Patricia stood up. "I want to apologize on behalf of the board to Mr. Harmon. The treatment he received was unacceptable, and it never should have happened. We will be working to revise our community standards to be clearer and more reasonable going forward." After the meeting, several neighbors came up to me to apologize or express support. Jennifer hugged me. "I'm so glad I told you about what I overheard," she said. "I couldn't let her get away with that." Marcus, another neighbor, shook my hand. "You did the community a service by standing up to her. She's been terrorizing people for years, but everyone was too afraid to push back. Over the next few weeks, things slowly returned to normal. The new HOA board, with Donald as interim president, rescinded dozens of questionable fines and violations. They also instituted new procedures requiring board votes before fines could be issued, preventing any one person from wielding too much power. Barbara's criminal case moved through the system. Sarah kept me updated on the proceedings. Barbara initially tried to fight the charge, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. Eventually, she accepted a plea deal that included probation, community service, and a requirement to attend anger management counseling. She also had to pay restitution to me for my legal fees. The truly ironic twist came in February. The neighborhood experienced another cold snap, and I noticed something interesting. 4 houses on my street had new windows installed, high-efficiency triple-pane windows just like mine. Jennifer's house was one of them. None of them had frost patterns anymore. I was checking my mail when Donald walked over from his house across the street. He had been one of the homes that got new windows. "I wanted to thank you," he said. "Not just for dealing with Barbara, though that needed to happen. But my energy bill last month was $60 lower than the previous January. These windows are incredible." "They're worth the investment," I agreed. He hesitated, then said, "I also wanted to apologize personally. I went along with Barbara on that frost pattern fine because she was very persuasive about maintaining standards, and I didn't want to rock the boat. I should have questioned it immediately. It was absurd, and I'm sorry you had to deal with all of that because I didn't have the spine to speak up." "I appreciate that," I said. "Really. It takes guts to admit when you're wrong." By March, the HOA had completely revised its community standards. The vague clauses about aesthetic consistency were replaced with specific, measurable requirements. There was nothing about frost patterns or seasonal appearance. The new board was actually functional, focused on real issues like road maintenance and community safety rather than petty violations. Barbara moved out of Pine Ridge Estates in April. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she bought a condo in Denver, somewhere without an HOA. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Sarah called me in May with a final update. Barbara's probation is going well, apparently. She's completed her community service and is attending counseling. She won't be able to serve on an HOA board again due to her conviction, so at least there's that. "I almost feel bad for her," I said. "Almost." "She created her own problems," Sarah replied. "You just wanted to live in your house with energy-efficient windows. She's the one who turned it into a crusade." I ended up writing a detailed review of my experience on several HOA awareness websites and forums. My story resonated with a lot of people who had their own nightmare experiences. I even got contacted by a state representative who was interested in pushing for stronger protections for homeowners against HOA overreach. The best outcome, though, was the transformation of Pine Ridge Estates itself. With Barbara gone and new leadership in place, the community actually became pleasant. The HOA focused on organizing neighborhood events and maintaining common areas rather than hunting for violations. People were friendlier, more relaxed. Several neighbors told me they had been considering moving because of Barbara's reign of terror, but now they were happy to stay. Jennifer and I became good friends. She and her husband had me over for dinner regularly, and we joked about the Great Frost Pattern War, as she called it. Her heating bills had dropped significantly with the new windows, and she was thrilled. In June, the HOA held its annual community barbecue. It was the first one in years that felt genuinely friendly rather than obligatory. I was manning one of the grills when Marcus came up with a beer for me. "To the man who took down the tyrant with frost-free windows," he said, raising his own beer. I laughed and clinked bottles with him. "I just wanted to save money on heating." "Yeah, but you did something more important. You stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult." "The rest of us were too chicken shit to challenge her, but you did. You changed this whole community for the better." Looking around at the neighbors chatting, kids playing, people actually enjoying themselves, I felt a sense of satisfaction. It had been a ridiculous battle over something as absurd as frost patterns, but the principle behind it mattered. No one should be bullied or harassed by the people who are supposed to be managing their community. Tom walked over with a plate of food. "I heard through the grapevine that 3 more houses on Maple Street are getting new windows installed next week. The window company must love you. You've probably brought them more business than any advertising could." "Unintentional marketing campaign," I said. "But hey, at least people are saving money and reducing their carbon footprint." Patricia approached our group, looking slightly nervous. She had stayed on the board as secretary under the new leadership. "Gregory, I wanted to give you this," she said, handing me an envelope. "It's an official letter from the HOA board apologizing for everything that happened and confirming that all fines against you have been permanently expunged from the record. We're also including a check for $500 to cover your initial legal consultation fees." It's not enough, I know, but it's something. I opened the envelope and read the letter. It was professionally written and genuinely apologetic. The check was there too. "This means a lot," I said. "Thank you." "We're also putting together a new homeowner welcome packet that clearly explains the actual community standards," she continued. "No more vague clauses that can be interpreted however someone wants. Everything is specific and reasonable now. You helped make that happen." As the evening went on, and the sun set over the mountains visible from our neighborhood, I reflected on the bizarre journey of the past several months. It had started with an absurd fine over frost patterns and escalated into criminal charges and community upheaval. But it had ended with positive change and a genuine community spirit. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Saw your neighborhood barbecue photos on Facebook. Glad things worked out. You earned this happy ending." I typed back, "Thanks for everything. Couldn't have done it without you." The truth was, though, that while Sarah had been essential in the legal battle, the real change had come from homeowners finally finding the courage to speak up. My situation had given them permission to voice concerns they'd had for years. Jennifer's willingness to report what she'd overheard had prevented Barbara from getting away with even worse behavior. Donald's decision to finally break ranks and vote to rescind the fine had been the first crack in Barbara's authority. It took a community to fix a community, even if it started with one guy refusing to pay a stupid fine. A few weeks later, I was featured in a local magazine article about HOA reform. The reporter asked me what advice I would give to other homeowners dealing with unreasonable HOA boards. "Document everything," I said. "Every interaction, every fine, every conversation. Keep records, take photos, save emails. If you do end up in a legal battle, that documentation is crucial. Also, find allies in your community. You're probably not the only one with concerns, but people are afraid to speak up. Be the one who breaks the silence, but do it strategically." The article got a lot of attention and generated more discussion about HOA reform at the state level. I even testified at a legislative hearing about proposed regulations that would provide more oversight and clearer standards for HOAs in Colorado. In August, I received an unexpected letter. It was from Barbara. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was handwritten and surprisingly humble. She apologized for her behavior, explaining that she had been dealing with personal issues that had caused her to become controlling and irrational. She acknowledged that the frost pattern fine was absurd and that her subsequent actions were inexcusable. She thanked me for not pursuing a civil lawsuit against her personally, even though I would have had grounds to do so. She said the counseling she had been required to attend had helped her realize how toxic her behavior had become. I didn't respond to the letter, but I didn't feel anger toward her anymore either. She had created chaos and caused real harm, but she was also clearly someone who had spiraled out of control and was now dealing with the consequences. I hoped the counseling was genuinely helping her. By September, Pine Ridge Estates had settled into a new normal. The HOA functioned smoothly under new leadership. Community standards were enforced fairly and reasonably. People actually volunteered to serve on committees because it was no longer a miserable experience. And my windows remained beautifully frost-free through the following winter, along with the dozen other homes that had upgraded to energy-efficient windows. When January rolled around again and temperatures dropped, I looked out at my clear windows with a sense of satisfaction. What had started as a point of conflict had become a symbol of positive change. Tom stopped by one cold morning with coffee from the local shop. We stood in my driveway, watching our breath fog in the air while our windows stayed perfectly clear. "You know what's funny?" he said. "A year ago, we would have been terrified to see Barbara walking down the street toward us. Now we can just enjoy our coffee in peace." "The simple pleasures," I agreed. "Seriously, though, you changed things around here. People aren't afraid anymore. The HOA actually serves the community now instead of terrorizing it. That matters." He was right. It did matter, not just for Pine Ridge Estates, but as an example of what happens when people stand up to unreasonable authority. My story had become part of a larger conversation about HOA reform and homeowner rights. I still work from home most days, still enjoy my peaceful house with its energy-efficient windows. The only difference is that now I actually like my community. I know my neighbors. We help each other out. The HOA organizes genuinely useful events and maintains common areas without harassing anyone over nonsense violations. Sometimes I still get emails from people who read about my story, sharing their own HOA nightmares or asking for advice. I try to respond when I can, offering whatever guidance seems useful. The most common thing I tell people is simple: don't be afraid to fight back when something is genuinely wrong. Yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it takes time and energy and sometimes money. But living under the thumb of petty tyranny is worse. The frost pattern incident taught me something important about community and courage. For years, the residents of Pine Ridge Estates had tolerated Barbara's increasingly unreasonable enforcement because fighting back seemed harder than just paying fines and staying quiet. But that tolerance enabled behavior that kept getting worse. It took one ridiculous, undeniable overreach to break the spell and make people realize they didn't have to accept it. In the end, the story of my HOA fining me for not having frost on my windows became a weird footnote in local history and a cautionary tale about HOA overreach. But more importantly, it became a reminder that communities are made up of individuals, and individuals have the power to demand better when things go wrong. My windows still don't frost up in winter. They're still beautifully efficient, keeping my home warm and my energy bills low. And now, instead of being a source of conflict, they're a source of pride and a visible reminder that standing up for what's right can lead to real, positive change. The neighborhood looks different now on cold winter mornings. Instead of uniform frost patterns on every window creating the artificial aesthetic consistency Barbara had demanded, there's a mix. Some homes have frost, some don't. Some have upgraded their windows, some haven't, and that's perfectly fine. That's what a real community looks like, diverse and individual, not forced into artificial uniformity. I still remember that first morning when Barbara knocked on my door, clipboard in hand, ready to fine me for having windows that worked too well. At the time, it seemed like an absurd nightmare. Looking back now, it was the beginning of something better, not just for me, but for everyone in Pine Ridge Estates who had been suffering in silence. Sometimes the most ridiculous conflicts lead to the most important changes, and sometimes frost-free windows are worth fighting for.